Hello everybody, this is Top MTG here today with another Magic the Gathering video. In today's video, we are going to be talking about all the spoilers for Zendikar Rising that have come out today being September 3rd. So yeah, why don't we actually just jump right into this? Starting off, we have Seagate Banneret. It's a 1-cost white 1/2 creature core warrior, and you can pay 5, one of it being white, and creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. Now, generally in limited, this is going to be a pretty good card. A 1/2 for 1 isn't awful, and on top of that, late game, you may be able to just win the game with a few extra points of damage that Seagate Banneret allows you to give to your team. So yeah, I think this is I think it may be undervalued, but I think it could be very good. Next, we have Angel Heart Protector. It's a 3-cost white creature human cleric 3/2, and when it enters the battlefield, target creature you control gains indestructible until end of turn. I'm not a big fan of this. First off, it's not instant speed, so you kind of have to know that you're going into something, and you can't use it as a trick, so I'd rather pay 3 and give something indestructible at instant speed and not get the creature. So yeah, that's just my opinion there. Next, we have Paired Tactician, 3-cost white creature human warrior 3/2, and whenever it and at least one other warrior attack, put a +1/+1 counter on it. So it's going to get bigger, a 3/2 for 3, and it has warrior synergy. Not bad. It probably could go in a party deck, but generally you don't want to have 2 warriors, so if it went in a warrior deck, maybe, we'd have to see. Next, we have Practice Tactics. It's a 1-cost white instant. Choose target attacking or blocking creature. Practice Tactics deals that creature an amount of damage equal to twice the number of creatures in your party. So if you have 1 creature in your party, this is going to deal 2 damage in white to an attacking or blocking creature. The only issue with this is, if you are losing so badly that you don't have creatures, this card literally does nothing. It's not, twice the number of creatures in your party plus 1 would have at least made this card somewhat playable, but in my opinion, unless you really can guarantee that you have a party, and the thing is also, if you're going to kill something big, that means you have to have enough creatures, and the odds that those creatures can't, kill it, I don't know, it just seems kind of narrow. But if you can get it to go off, it is very efficient. Next, we have Archon of Ameria. It's a 3-cost white creature Archon 2/3 with flying, and it says each player can't cast more than 1 spell each turn. Non-basic lands your opponents control enter the battlefield tapped. So this is a very, very mean kind of Staxy card. It's going to say, hey, I'm going to try and slow you down as much as possible. You can only cast 1 thing per turn, so yeah, and your lands that are non-basics are always going to enter the battlefield tapped. Now, in Standard right now, I don't know how relevant that second clause is. What does this affect? Okay, it affects Fabled Passage double. So first off, when you cast Fabled Passage, it's going to enter the battlefield tapped, and then when you crack it, no matter what, the land's entering tapped. So that is really bad. It affects, I guess, the new dual lands that we're getting, and that's about it. I mean, I guess it also affects the castles. So, it does affect some things, but this will have a bigger effect in, say, a Commander game or a Modern game, where there are a lot more, fetches, which are all now going to enter tapped. So I think that, and we have seen effects like this, but it'll be interesting to see if this has any effect on the meta. Maybe it'll be an interesting sideboard card, depending on what, you're trying to beat. Next, we have Ameria's Call. It's a 7-cost white sorcery, and you can create 2 4/4 white angel warrior creature tokens with flying. And then non-angel creatures you control gain indestructible until end of turn. So yeah, for 7, you get 8 power for 7, and then all your creatures besides your angels are going to gain indestructible until your next turn. So they're indestructible on the attack and indestructible on the block. So that's definitely interesting. But what's more interesting is the other side. We have a land, and normally the land on the other side of cards is it enters tapped and then it taps to add white. But this is it enters tapped and lets you pay 3 life. So it's kind of a bolt land, and they're monocolored. Obviously, shock land, shock deals 2 damage, bolt land, bolt deals 3. Either way, I think this is actually a really good card. I would say that in the average white deck, you can afford, now, not every deck is going to want to do this. If you're a deck that doesn't run many lands, and you're never going to get up to 7 mana, or anything like that, then it may not be an auto-include, but I feel like in a lot of more mid-rangey or control-y white decks, you can probably afford to swap out 1 plains, and have it enter tapped occasionally, and if you really need it untapped, you can pay that 3 life. And then if you ever get to the point in the game where you're like, I don't need more lands because I'm at 7 mana, cast Ameria's Call. So I would not be surprised if this is a 1 or 2 of inclusion in like a control deck where it can maybe afford to either take the 3 damage or have that land come in tapped, and then, you know, think about it as a tap land that like kind of has pseudo cycling where you're gonna cycle it for Ameria's Call every time and it costs 0 mana, but you have to pay the 7 mana for it. So you can think about it like that. You know, imagine it had cycling for 0 and it said whenever you cycle this you guaranteed draw Ameria's Call. It wouldn't be awful. So yeah, I like this card. And unfortunately, it's weird seeing a mythic land. I hope I pull one just because I would love to put this in a couple different decks. Next, we have Mckindy Stampede. It's a 5-cost white sorcery, and it says creatures you control get +2/+2 until end of turn, and then the Mesa is just enters tap, add white. This is one of those cards where the effect on the left is really overcosted, and the land on the right isn't great. I think this is a pretty good mechanic, the dual DCFs, but which is double-face cards. But the issue I have with it is that neither the land nor the sorcery are good, which means that, like, are you really that incentivized to play it? Maybe. You know, there are some of them that are pretty good, but I feel like they needed to make this, like, I don't know. It really depends on how you look at it during deck building. Are you counting these as a land that can be used as a creature or sorcery/instant, or are you looking at it as a creature, sorcery, instant that if you, in emergency, need a land? Because if you're doing it like that, then this card is kind of meh, but if you're looking at it as a land that you might be able to use, it may be okay. So I guess it really depends on the point of view. I just wish that, I mean, a lot of cards, and I've noticed this, when there's a mechanic, sometimes, you know, let's say Raid from Ixalan, which I know is going back a little bit, a lot of the time, you know, if you're not trying to do that mechanic, like Raid, if you're not doing Raid, the cards, for their normal effect, are wildly overcosted. Or in Rage, for instance, if you're not, like, really benefiting off of it, the card is really overcosted. And like, I get that you should probably pay 1 extra mana for an effect because you have the option to actually just not do that effect and do something different. But, you know, we have spells that are much better than this in, like, the 3 mana range in Standard. So I think paying 2 extra and making it double white is a little aggressive, especially when your other option is a tapped monocolored land. So I wish these were a little bit better, but who knows, maybe in playtesting, and honestly, I can't really say too much about this until we play with them, because maybe if that was the case, this would become too good. So we would have to see. I don't know. Let me know what you guys think about the power level. Should these be at a lower power level like this, or do you think they should maybe be bumped up a little bit to see more play? Next, we have Angel of Destiny. It's a 5-cost white creature, Angel Cleric, 2/6 with flying and double strike, so it's kind of a 4/6 here. But whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you and that player each gain that much life. So it does not say instead. So essentially what's happening is your opponent doesn't lose life to your creatures. So you're going to hit them for, say, 2 with Angel of Destiny. Let's just say it with something else. Let's say you hit them with Sarah Angel. They're going to take 4, and assuming they don't die to that 4, as long as the trigger can go on the stack, then you are going to gain 4 and your opponent is going to gain 4. So that's kind of interesting. How are you going to kill them? Well, it says at the beginning of your end step, if you have at least 15 more life than your starting life total, each player Angel of Destiny attacked this turn loses the game. So it's not just a I win the game. Angel of Destiny does need to attack someone. She doesn't need to, you know, actually hit, which is nice. This is an interesting kind of win con. It's a little expensive, but it's an interesting, you know, kind of I'm going to make you lose. Although because it needs to attack, it's not like a come out of nowhere kind of card. So I actually think this is really interesting. And 15 life, you know, that means you kind of have to deal 15 damage to your opponent, assuming you didn't take any life gain or don't have any other sources of life gain. If you mix this with like something with lifelink, 5 damage with a lifelinker, right? You're gonna gain 5 from lifelink, gain 5 from this. You're now 10 life closer to that. So I think it's an interesting card. It actually is pretty powerful, but I don't know if it'll actually find a home. Next we have Cascade Seer. It's a 4-cost blue creature, Merfolk Wizard, and when it enters the battlefield, scry X, where X is the number of creatures in your party. Very generic, very blah. In Limited, it'll be a nice wizard for you to get for your party. Next we have Bubble Snare. It's a blue enchantment aura with kicker 3. Enchant creature. When it enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, tap enchanted creature. Enchanted creature doesn't untap during its controller's untap step. Okay, this is how I think kicker should be done. I mean, it shouldn't be like an effect where it's like, if I'm not paying for kicker, the card is worthless. If you enchant a creature that is already tapped, you don't need to pay the kicker. Which, if you're trying to get rid of your opponent's biggest creature or something, my point is here, the one cost is very generous, and if you do end up wanting the full effect of a enchantment tap down, it doesn't untap, you have to pay 1 more than normal. Blue 1 is the cost of a typical in standard tap down effect. You can go 3 in a blue to give it flash, or you can go 2 blue to have the option, like here, to only have the tap clause, which basically means like, hey, you don't want someone to activate their tap ability? Well, once they activate it once, you can just pay 1, so I really like the design of this card. Next, we have Cleric of the Cold Abyss. It's a 2-cost blue creature, Merfolk Cleric, and when Cleric of the Cold Abyss blocks a creature, that creature can't untap during its controller's next untap step. So more just tapping manipulation. I actually think this is pretty good, especially if you can get your Cleric of the Cold Abyss to survive. Generally, though, your opponent is going to see this ahead of time and plan accordingly. So I don't know how powerful this really is, although it could cause combat to kind of halt. Next, we have Sure-Footed Infiltrator. It's a 4-cost blue creature, Merfolk Rogue, 2/3, and you can tap another untapped rogue you control, and it can't be blocked this turn. And whenever it deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. So again, if you're going for like a rogue tribal deck, this definitely goes in it. I mean, the ability to just consistently tap a creature, tap 2 of your creatures to draw a card, and deal 2 damage to your opponent is really good. Of course, you do need rogues, but I think a rogue tribal deck could be kind of interesting. And the more and more I see these, the more and more I want to build like a rogue tribal deck, especially in Historic, where there's a lot more tribal for rogues there. That would be very interesting. Next, we have Lull Mage's Domination, X blue for sorcery, and this spell costs 3 less to cast if it targets a creature whose controller has 8 or more cards in their graveyard. So if your opponent has 8 or more cards in their graveyard, you get to pay 3 for X without actually paying for it. So X is at minimum 3. Now, you do get to choose if you only want to do 2, but it says gain control of target creature with CMC mana cost X. So it is exactly. So if you, for instance, decide to pay 5 mana for this, you better have a target with 5 mana CMC. So essentially what you can think of is if you've milled your opponent 8 cards, which a mill deck can do for literally 2 mana and 2 cards that are adventures, so then they get to play them, then you can pay 3 mana to gain control of something with CMC 3 or less. Then it's 4. So if you mill them 8, it's however much mana you have, gain control of something with that CMC, as long as 3 of your mana is blue. So keep that in mind. That's kind of how you can think about the cost reduction effect there. Next, we have Coral Helm Chronicler. It's a 3-cost blue creature, Merfolk Wizard, 2/2, and whenever you cast a kick spell, you may draw a card, then discard a card, so more kicker as a mechanic. I don't know how powerful that'll be, but it really depends on what cards they print for the mechanic. And then it says, when it enters the battlefield, look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal a creature with a kicker ability from among them, and put it into your hand, put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So just look at the top 5, random card, or not random card with kicker. This is definitely, if you're building a kicker deck, this is definitely going in it. Next, we have Seagate Stormcaller. So this is a 2-cost blue creature, human wizard, 2/1, and it says when it enters the battlefield, copy the next instant or sorcery spell with CMC 2 or less you cast this turn when you cast it. So the reason it's worded so weirdly is because any spell that copies something, you have the issue of if there's a creature that copies something, copies a spell, and then you have a spell that copies the creature. Now, this would have to be CMC 2 or less, but I'm sure it exists. Then you have this issue where it creates an infinite loop. So this way, you have to, it's only the next spell you cast, and it's only the ones that you actually cast. It doesn't copy something from the stack, which, first of all, means your opponent knows you're about to do something. It's not like, haha, now I'm copying at instant speed. But this thing also has another thing. If you pay 5 for the kicker, meaning you are paying 7 mana, you get to copy the spell twice. Now, it doesn't say get rid of the CMC 2 or less cost, which I think would be fair because, well, if you're paying 7 mana just to copy the spell, you're probably gonna win the game because that means you have to have enough, I don't get the kicker on this one. You have to pay 7 to copy the spell twice. that means that you need to have 7 plus however much the spell cost. Plus, you're telegraphing to your opponent, hey, I'm about to play something, you may want to counter it. Or it's going to be detrimental, so maybe you do something. I don't know. I just think that, yes, you are getting a 2-1 out of it. I'd rather have a spell that did this. Maybe it was a little cheaper. But the fact that maybe if you have 9 mana, you can only double cast a 2-cost spell. Keep that in mind. You can only double cast a 2-cost spell. And actually, that's all it ever lets you do, which is kind of dumb when you're paying 7 mana. If you're paying 7 mana to duplicate something twice, you should be allowed to do something with, greater CMC than 2. So I think the kicker, if you did, okay, here's what I would do to make this card better. Reduce the kicker cost down to 4. You're now going to pay 6 mana, and the kicker is going to make it so you copy it twice, and the CMC restriction is removed. Now you're paying 6 mana to copy something twice. You get a 2-1 out of it, whatever, make it a 1-1, I don't care. That's not super relevant to the game. And then you can copy something. So if you want to copy something that costs 4, you now need to have 10 mana, and I think that's fair for 10 mana. Next we have Blood Beckoning, 1-cost black sorcery with kicker 3, and return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. If the spell is kicked, instead return 2 creatures. So, yeah, pretty good. If you're going to run a card that revives something, if you have some extra mana, revive 2 things. If you don't need to revive 2 things, you don't have to. I like the card. Next we have Feed the Swarm, a 2-cost black sorcery, destroy target creature or enchantment an opponent controls. You lose life equal to its permanent, that permanent's convert mana cost. There's nothing special about this card. No, I'm kidding. This is the first time Black has gotten Destroy Target Enchantment, and they talked a little bit about this, and so if you haven't heard, they're making Black tertiary, meaning third, in being able to destroy enchantments. Obviously, I believe it's green is number 1, white is number 2, black is number 3 now. And before, Black couldn't destroy artifacts or enchantments, and they said it's not really fair that, green can't destroy creatures, red can't destroy enchantments, why can't Black destroy artifacts and enchantments? That doesn't seem fair. So now Black just can't destroy artifacts. And so, yeah. Now, they said it will oftentimes come with a cost, but paying 2 to destroy target creature or enchantment on the same card, and you lose life equal to the permanent's converted mana cost, which is a pretty big deal. But a lot of, the big threats, especially now, I don't know how standard will look like, but, a Nissalant coming at you. Well, you're just going to pay 2 and kill it. Now, it is a sorcery, which I think really downgrades the card. I would rather this spend maybe double black or 3 mana and instant speed, but yeah, I definitely like the card. Next we have Nyamba Skitter Sneak. It's a 4-cost black creature human rogue, and as long as an opponent has 8 or more cards in their graveyard, it gets +1/+0 and has Menace. Okay, so you get a 4/4 for 4 with Menace if your opponent has been milled. Very generic, very blah. Actually, this whole 8 or more cards in their graveyard, didn't we have a card just like this in M21? And it was a rogue. That's kind of interesting. Next we have Malakir Blood Priest, 2-cost black creature vampire cleric, 2/1, and when it enters the battlefield, each opponent loses X life and you gain X life, where X is the number of creatures in your party. So at worst, this is a 2/1 that drains your opponent for 1 and you gain 1, because it is a cleric, assuming that they don't kill this in instant speed. But if you have one other thing, now you're draining 2, gaining 2 for 2, and also getting a 2/1, this is actually a fairly efficient party card. I mean, in limited, especially a 2/1 for 2 that also drains is pretty good. Next we have Highborne Vampire, 4-cost 4/3 vampire warrior. Just gives you that vampire tribal and that warrior tribal. Next we have Mindcarver, 1-cost black artifact equipment, and when it enters the battlefield, attach it to target creature you control. I think almost every single piece of equipment has had this text on it, so I wonder if that is going to consistently happen. It seems like it will. Equipped creature gets +1/+0. It gets +3/+0 instead, as long as an opponent has 8 or more cards in their graveyard. Okay, I don't like how this is worded. It should have said equipped creature gets +1/+0. It gets an additional +2/+1 if an opponent has that. Not it gets +3/+1 instead, as long as. That just sounds a little awkward. Obviously, that's just a nitpick on the wording. Obviously, people know what it's going to do, but in a rogue deck, +3/+1 for 1 mana, equipping, instantly is not bad. I think this could definitely fit into a rogue deck, maybe not as a 4-up, though. Next, we have Zoth Consumption, 6-cost black sorcery. Each opponent loses 4 life, and you gain 4 life, and you can play it as a land. So, again, this one you look at, is that really worth 6? No, it's not. You can, I think, pay 4 and deal 3 to anything, and you gain 3. Obviously, this is each opponent, so that is a little different, but then you have Zoth Bloodbog. So it's entering the battlefield tapped, and you're adding a colored mana. Okay, so are you looking at this as a tap land that if you don't need lands, you can lose 4 life and gain 4 life? Maybe, but like, I don't know. Again, I think how you judge these cards is really how you look at it and how you build your deck. Are you putting it in as a sorcery that has a land as a backup, or are you putting it as a land that has a sorcery as a backup? Because if you're putting it as a land that has a sorcery as a backup, I guess it's probably better than if you're putting it as a spell with a land. But even just, I don't know. I think that these are very interesting, and we will have to see how it really affects deck building. It's hard to see ahead of time. I'm sure these are pretty appropriately balanced, I hope. Next, we have Soul Shatter. It's a 3-cost black instant. Each opponent sacrifices a creature or planeswalker with the highest converted mana cost among creatures and planeswalkers they control. So, first off, it says among creatures and planeswalkers, so it's not like they get to choose, I want to sack a creature instead of sack my most valuable planeswalker. If you have an Ugin out, and then your highest creature is a 6-cost, you have to sacrifice the Ugin. I like this card. It's probably going to get rid of the biggest threat on the board. The only thing is, if it's like a Hydra, maybe not. Yeah, I like this card. Generally, I think it's going to be pretty good, and I actually think it'll see a decent amount of play. Next, we have Fissure Wizard. It's a 2-cost red creature goblin wizard 2/1, and when it enters the battlefield, discard a card if you do draw a card. Very generic, very boring. Cleansing Wildfire, 1 in a red for a sorcery, destroy target land. Its controller may search their library for a basic land and put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle their library, draw a card. So, I actually think this could be a pretty good card. I think this is another one where I saw it on Mark Rosewater's blog like within the last 2 weeks, because I occasionally scan because he gives some information, like how the new type of dual lands, the final 4 of them are coming soon. But Cleansing Wildfire, someone asked if land destruction in standard in red could be cheaper if it replaced the land. And this does that. It also lets you draw a card, and it's costing 2 mana. Now, if Field of the Dead was still going to be in standard and wasn't banned and all that, I would say this would be a much more prominent card, but unless we get any land that is super problematic, which we could, I mean, maybe that man land that we're going to see later on in this video could be problematic, but yeah, I don't know, maybe people may run this just to get the whole draw a card trigger, and then worst case, kill a castle or kill a triome or something like that. So it'll be interesting. Next, we have Goma Feda Vanguard. It's a 2-cost red creature, human warrior 2/2, so 2/2 for 2, but when it attacks, target creature an opponent controls with power less than or equal to the number of warriors you control can't block, so she's gonna boost up all your warriors. If you're running a warrior deck, this isn't awful, especially because warriors are probably gonna be very combat focused. So yeah, also just cheap warrior for your party in limited. Next, we have Skyclave Geopede. It's a 3-cost red creature insect with trample and landfall, and whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, it gets +2/+2 until end of turn. This is, again, a very, very, especially this one, a very aggressive card. If we start to see a lot more ways to dump lands on the battlefield, I would not be surprised if we see like a Gruul Rush deck in limited, and maybe even in standard. I mean, +2/+2 for a single land. I've seen decks get out 3 to 4 lands on one turn, and this has trample. This might be pretty good. Next, we have Rockslide Sorcerer. It's a 4-cost red creature human wizard, and whenever you cast an instant sorcery or wizard, it deals 1 damage to any target. That's actually pretty good. It's not 1 damage to each opponent like Electrostatic Field was from the Izzet Guild. It's not Gutter Snipe where it's 2 damage to your opponent. This just lets you hit anything, and it also allows for wizard spells to be used. So yeah, I think if you're running a wizard deck, you probably are running this card. Next, we have Song Mad Treachery, 5-cost red sorcery. Gain control of target creature until end of turn. Untap that creature. It gains haste until end of turn. And then, a tap land for red. So here's one where I'm like, okay, this one is act of treason. They didn't even try to upgrade it slightly. Maybe this one I would have less of an issue with if it said gain control of target creature or artifact. But here you'll notice that I don't know. I just think that paying 5 is probably never good. I mean, I guess it's one of those things where I think these were designed in such a way that you're filling land slots with them, and then if in case of emergency, you can cast the sorcery side. And I guess that's maybe a better way to look at them, but I've always been looking at these as here's a spell and the land is an just in case kind of thing. But it seems they took the opposite approach. And the reason I looked at it like that was because, well, first off, the other part is on the left side. It's the side that in all other zones, this card is the left side. So I don't know. I just wish they kind of took the inverse of this, but maybe this is for the best. Next, we have Valakut Exploration. It's a 3-cost red enchantment, and whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card as long as it remains exiled. So kind of just play a land, draw a card in red, and it's not until end of turn. Yes, red gets this impulsive draw, but this doesn't feel super impulsive because there's not a huge, timer to when you can play it. But actually, there is. It just doesn't look as well like that. At the beginning of your end step, if there's cards exiled with Valakut Exploration, put them in their owner's graveyard. Then it deals that much damage to each opponent. So if you can play like 4 or 5 lands, maybe in a Gruul Aggro limited deck, or even maybe a Gruul Aggro like real deck, then you're gonna get to first off try to cast 4 cards. If you don't want any of the cards or can't cast any of the cards, now you're dealing 4 damage to each person's face. You're kind of turning land drops into damage and card draw, which I think is insane. I would not be surprised if this starts to see play in commander decks, especially those that are going to want to play lots of lands. Next we have Roiling Vortex. 2-cost red enchantment. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, it deals 1 damage to them, so that includes you. So it's kind of just saying, hey, the game's going to end eventually. Whenever a player casts a spell, if no mana was spent to cast that spell, it deals 5 damage to that player. So you're going to stop some shenanigans with like maybe Golos or I don't know, lots of cards that cheat things and actually just like put things from like the graveyard to the battlefield. But this is interesting. And then you can pay a 1 red and opponents can't gain life this turn. I think this is really needed. It is a nice sideboard tech against life gain, which I think is kind of annoying to play against. So being able to just be like, no, I think this is a pretty fair card. Next we have Relic Robber, 3-cost red creature goblin rogue, haste 2/2, and whenever Relic Robber deals combat damage to a player, that player creates a 0/1 colorless goblin construct artifact creature with this creature can't block, and at the beginning of your upkeep, this creature deals 1 damage to you. So this is very, very interesting. So it can't block, and it's 0/1, so you have no incentive to block it. It can't block, so they're gonna have to try and get rid of this 0/1. And you're going to be able to maybe stack these up. So I think this is very interesting. Now, obviously, if they have any way to sacrifice or kill things, they can get rid of it. But I actually really like the design of this card. It's kind of like a little mini game of, oh, how am I going to get rid of these 0/1s? Next, we have Joraga Visionary, 4-cost green, 3/2, and when it enters the battlefield, draw a card. Not a big fan, rather play Elvish Visionary, or Llanowar Visionary, which is a 3-cost. It enters the battlefield, draw a card, and you get to tap and add for green, but of course this is a common, so it's probably limited. Next we have Nissa's Zendikar. It's a 4-cost green enchantment aura. Enchanted land is a 4/4 elemental creature with reach and haste. It's still a land, so it's a 4/4. And whenever enchanted land dies, return that card to its owner's hand. So that's really nice. It lets you kind of take your land, turn it into a creature, and if it dies, you get to bring it back to your hand, which also means you can trigger another landfall trigger. Next, we have Broken Wings, 3-cost instant, destroy target artifact, enchantment, or creature with flying. I actually really, really, really like the design of this card, although I prefer the 2-cost instant that destroys target artifact, enchantment, or exiles a card from a graveyard. But destroying a creature with flying is pretty good, and this could become a sideboard card. Next we have Vine Gecko. It's a 2-cost green creature lizard elemental. The first spell you cast each turn with kicker costs 1 less to cast, and whenever you cast a kick spell, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Now, okay, because this is a translation, I don't know exactly how this is worded, but is the top ability saying the kicker costs 1 less to cast, or that the spell costs 1 less to cast? Because if it's the spell, this becomes a lot better. If it's the kicker cost, it means you have to pay the kicker, but the other one just says the first spell you cast each turn with kicker, so who knows? And then it's going to get bigger as you kick. So again, just another kicker matters kind of card. Next, we have Roiling Regrowth. It's a 3-cost green instant. Sacrifice a land, search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, put them onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle your library. So it's an instant, which is nice. Obviously, slightly worse than I would say Cultivate, but it does give you 2 landfall triggers right away. It stuffs your graveyard with land, so I think it definitely has a use. Very interesting. In like a commander deck, this would be great in a Gitrog monster deck. We have Vastwood Surge, 4-cost green sorcery with kicker 4, so either 4 or 8. And it lets you search your library for up to 2 basic land cards and put them onto the battlefield tapped. So you're paying 1 more and it's sorcery speed, but they just both go on the battlefield. Then shuffle your library. If the spell is kicked, put 2 +1/+1 counters on each creature you control. Yeah, I think Kicker makes a little bit more sense here than, say, on the Spell Duplicator. It's kind of just a, I have extra mana, mine as well. But the main reason you throw this in a deck is for the main effect. The Kicker is just if you happen to have extra mana. Next we have Tank. Also, you're likely to have extra mana in that kind of deck because you're going to be adding it. Now, here we have Tangled Fluorohedron and Tangled Veil. So the Fluorohedron is a 2-cost green creature elemental 1/1 that you can tap to add green, or you can play it as a land. Now, I've seen a lot of people say this card is really dumb, and here's what they're saying. They're essentially saying, hey, why would you ever cast the left side? Because, well, both are going to tap for 1 green mana and you both have to wait a turn, but the one on the left is easier to remove and cost you mana to play. But what I don't think people are seeing here is that, hey, you can then play a land and play Tangled Fluorohedron on the same turn. It's like asking, hey, why would you play Llanowar Elves when you could just play a land? And I don't know why I've seen many people saying this. I mean, I get that, hey, maybe this isn't a great thing, but think about it like this. If you have, say, a Leafkin Druid who's now cycling out, and you want to replace it in your deck, this is a great card to replace it with. Yes, it doesn't ever start upgrading to tapping to 2 mana, but it does say, hey, if you don't have another land to play, you can kind of play the mana dork for free. So I actually think this is one of the better versions of this card, where I would play a 2-cost 1/1 that taps to add 1 green mana. Obviously, there's better cards, but the fact that I can then, if I don't have mana, just play it for free, essentially. Or if I didn't play a land, I can play it for free. I find to be very, very, very interesting. And I don't get the hate over this card. Maybe it's just I've happened to see more of it, but it seems like a lot of people aren't getting the fact that you can play Tangled Fluorohedron on the same turn that you're playing a land. And that, if you don't play a land, it's kind of just a free Tangled Fluorohedron, except it's not a 1/1, so you can't, boost it or any of that. So, yeah, I hope people understand that when looking at this card. Next, we have Inscription of Abundance, 2-cost green source instant, Kicker 2 green. Choose 1. If it was kicked, choose any number instead, so it's kind of like Entwine. But put 2 +1/+1 counters on target creature. Target player gains X life, where X is the power among creatures they control, and then target creature you control fights. Target creature you don't. By the way, if you are casting this for the Kicker, so you're paying 5 mana, 5 mana to do all that is not awful. But just, they resolve in the order they're listed. So you will put 2 counters on something, then gain the life, then the target creature fights, which is the most beneficial order anyway. So, yeah, I think it's a pretty good card. Would not be surprised if this sees play, even in just a sideboard. A 2-cost instant, target creature you control fights target creature you don't is pretty good. And then the fact that you can either pay 5 and get all the effects, or just do one of the other effects if you need, is pretty beneficial. Next, we have Yashran, the Relentless Land, 4-cost green-white, legendary creature, elemental boar, 4/4, and when it enters the battlefield, search your library for a basic fourth and a basic plains and put them into your hand. So it's kind of, when it enters the battlefield, draw 2, but you're guaranteed to draw lands. Then players cannot pay life or sacrifice non-land permanents to cast cards or use activated abilities. This is a very kind of hosey commander. You can't cast any spell that says adds an additional cost to cast this spell, do something, or pay life, or any of that. It does say to use activated ability or cast cards, so shocklands still work. By the way, this does not get rid of the cost of doing this. It just means that you can't. So if something says you have to sacrifice something to cast it, this does not mean you can just not do the casting or not do the sacrifice part. It just means you can't cast it. It is a very hosey kind of color, and if something in the meta ever kind of revolves around paying life or sacrificing, I'm sure this will be a great sideboard card. Next, we have Zagras, Thief of Heartbeats, 6-cost red and black, legendary creature, vampire rogue, 4/4, and this spell costs 1 less to cast for each creature in your party, so this could theoretically cost 2. It has flying, death touch, and haste, which is a pretty good combination. It says other creatures you control have death touch. That's pretty insane. And whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a planeswalker, destroy that planeswalker. So not too much to build around in terms of commander. I guess a party deck, this may be the head of it. But giving everything else death touch is a pretty awesome effect, and I wonder how that can be used. Then we have Crawling Barrens. It's a land, tap to add colorless, or you can pay 4 and put 2+1/+1 counters on it. Then you may have it become a 0/0. It's still a land. So the counters stay on it. So yes, the first time you play it, it's now just a 2/2. And then it goes back to being a creature. Then it becomes a 4/4, then a 6/6, then an 8/8. So eventually you get this huge creature. And what's great about it is it kind of dodges board wipes, because it only becomes it until end of turn. So you probably just do it on your turn. So I would not be surprised if this is a 1 or 2 of in a control deck, where, you know, they can board wipe the board and still have their biggest creature protected. Alrighty guys, that's going to do it for this video. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, please hit that like button, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.